Good evening, thanks for clicking my video. Let's get right into it, shall we? First thing you need when painting miniatures is a good, sturdy, stable surface. Just look at this chunk of wood. I know that wherever I paint, it's going to look like a rejected Jackson Pollock. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your paint station. Next, you're gonna wanna say, let there be light, so get you a good bright lamp. For the actual paint that you'll be applying to the miniature, well, I like to go really cheapo. I tend to get the little packs that you can get inexpensively at craft stores. Now, typically, I'll buy jumbo size of the black and white cheap paint. You're gonna need it to mix in with the other colors and create gradients. Personally, I keep pinching the pennies on the paintbrushes as well. I get cheapos, one for the tiny little details, and the other is usually broader and fuller so that I can spread the paint wide. You're gonna need a little something to mix the colors up on a palette. I tend to use a tiny tea saucer. You're gonna want a nice absorbent paper towel for drying off your brushes throughout the process. I like Pentagram brand. Fill up a glass or a mug with some tap water so you can dip your brush in and give it a rinsey poo. Because I'm a daredevil and I like to live life on the razor edge, I usually have a little mug of coffee as well. It is inevitable that I will dip my paintbrush in the coffee, but that's okay. I kind of like a little bit of paint in my drink from time to time. Tonight I'll be painting this little thief miniature. It'll represent my character in Goblins and Grifters. Look at that tiny little mug. We're gonna go on so many adventures, you and I. Now that we have our miniature selected and our little art station set up, let's commence to painting. Back when I first started painting miniatures, they were made out of metal and they were more expensive, but they didn't look as good. And you had to base paint them with a coat before you could start putting the pretty colors on. It's much cheaper now to buy miniatures, and they're usually pre-based. Ah, the future. What wonders it holds. I almost forgot the last little piece of equipment that you might want to use. My peepers are really keen, but when I have to focus on something super tiny with a lot of detail like a miniature, I like to use an advantage. And in my case, it's these awesome reader glasses that I got on discount the week after Halloween. I love them so much. If I ever need prescription, I'm going to bring these frames and have them fitted to them. Much better. I can see all the tiny little details. I can even get the little eyes. One trick I used to use was to take a toothpick. I personally don't own any toothpicks, but my grandmother always had them around. I think old people have an affinity for them. I'll have to ask Frank about that. Anyway, I would snap a toothpick and it would leave a little tiny shard, and I would dip that in the paint and I would create the most perfect little peepers. Another little trick of the trade I like to use is called dry brushing, and it's where you take just a little bit of the paint onto the brush and you kind of flick it really lightly and rapidly across the surface so that it just catches the little nooks and crannies and makes it pop. You'll find your own little techniques and ways of doing things. Mostly just try to relax and have fun. I like to pretend sometimes that the miniature I'm painting was the victim of a gorgon and they were turned to stone, and it's my job to slowly bring them back to life. I like to do little homemade color washes where I'll take a little bit of the color I'm using and dip it in the water till it thins out and it's just barely a ghost of what it was, but it's really got a lot of moisture, and then I drop it onto the miniature and let it cascade down and catch all the little rivulets and folds. Personally, I don't use miniatures very much in my actual play games, but some people do, and either way, I really like to paint them. That color wash is really bringing out a lot of the details. Whoops. I can always count on dropping the miniature I'm painting at least a dozen times. It's probably a side effect of all that coffee. I've seen where some people stick the miniature like on a little lump of clay and then they hold it by the clay while they paint it. And that's probably a good idea, but I've never actually had the foresight to do it. Looks like my little thief is just about done. One more detail and here we go. Let's do a little bit of a before and after. Here it is all stark and stoic. And here it is after I put a little life into it. Painting miniatures is something you think you might be into. I would strongly encourage you to give it a try and not be intimidated. I find it very meditative. And while what I do might not be masterpieces, I get better, I think, every time I try, just like with anything else. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight, and if you enjoyed what you saw, you might consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. It really helps a lot.